Hello, everyone. Welcome to our next roundtable session. Very pleased to have you all joining us today. Thanks for taking the time to be with us in this group, and very, very much looking forward to the conversation that we have planned. So just by way of reminder, today's roundtable session is on the topic of what have we learned from setbacks and how to move the field forward post-COVID. We have some wonderful speakers here for you, but we do want to encourage you to really get involved in the discussion. Please feel free to use the chat if you have thoughts and comments that you want to make while the initial presentations are underway. Please also, if you have questions or comments that you want to put verbally, please use the hand raise button in the Zoom meeting, and we'll then invite you to speak out loud and correspond with our speakers and moderator. I would also ask that if you are asking questions, please make sure you have your cameras on. It's just a much nicer setting when we can see everyone in the room, see all those faces together, know that we're here with you all. So you're very welcome to turn your cameras on now as well if you'd like to get involved in the discussion. But without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our moderator for today's session. Thank you very much for joining us, Natalia. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Angel. So I'm a part of the Lilly corporate business development team. So working from London and doing search and evaluation of the opportunities for us for potential partnerships. And it's my great pleasure to have Michael and Maddalena today. And I would like to start with the introduction round. So Michael, please go ahead and tell us about yourself and Lygenesis.
Okay, great. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate the invitation. Thrilled to be here today virtually with everyone. So I had just a few slides to orient folks. So if we could share those, that would be great. I will start by just saying, so I'm Michael Hufford. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Lygenesis. We're a clinical stage cell therapy company that focuses on using the lymph node as a bioreactor to regrow functioning ectopic organs. My other co-founders include Dr. Paulo Fontes, who's a transplant surgeon, trained with Tom Starzl, who pioneered the first successful liver transplants here at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, and has overseen the care of more than 10,000 patients with advanced liver disease. And my chief science officer is Dr. Eric Lagasse, and our technology grew out of his laboratory that had really a decade's worth of NIH funding at the McGowan Institute for Regenerative Medicine here at the University of Pittsburgh. And so we've been off and running now for just about 3 years. And so I'm going to quickly bring you up to speed on our progress, the impact of COVID on our development, and then just wrap up with a few final thoughts on the development and commercialization of longevity therapies. So I'll just try to get through this quickly. So next slide, if you would, please. Just in terms of Thanks. In terms of the highlights then, so as I mentioned, we have a cell therapy. So we use allogeneic cells engrafted via endoscopic ultrasound into lymph nodes. So the lymph node, as you know, from an evolutionary biology perspective, right, is this highly effective and efficient bioreactor for T cells. Just the way that cancer hijacks that biology to form tumors, we're hijacking it for a therapeutic purpose. And so what Eric has shown is the ability of the lymph node to serve as a very, very efficient and effective bioreactor for a variety of different tissue types, including the liver, pancreas, kidney, and thymus. We're starting a phase 2A clinical trial in patients with end-stage liver disease at Harvard's Mass General Hospital with a target first patient in the 3rd quarter. Don't tell my clinical development team because I tell them that we have to have it by the end of the 2nd quarter. But the realistic guidance, I think, for a first patient in will be 3rd quarter. And we're very proud of the fact we've been very capitally efficient. I've spent over 20 years in drug development, developing small molecules, peptides, proteins, and medical devices. Have interacted with the FDA a great deal, more than perhaps I would have liked over the past 20 years in a variety of programs. And so very, very proud of how capitally efficient we've been at Lygenesis. On just $7 million invested at the time we were able to get our first IND enabled. We've raised a total of 18 million to date. Next slide. And actually, I also just want to note, in terms of the impact of COVID, before I forget, we were frankly enormously fortunate, right? we had finished our final IND enabling study. We were in the process of submitting the IND. Some of our histopathology was delayed because we couldn't have as many folks reading the tissues as we would have liked. But compared to had we been trying to enroll the first patient in the midst of the pandemic, right, it would have been a real challenge and setback. So we were very fortunate in terms of the timing that it didn't adversely affect our timeline too much. Super high level then, organ transplantation today, one donated organ treats one patient, which means there's a incredible disconnect in supply and demand, right? There's far more demand than supply. Here in the US, dozens of patients die every single day awaiting an organ that will never come. And for those that do get it, it is major surgery, which means it's both extraordinarily expensive and only the sickest patients qualify. Next slide. In contrast, using our technology, a single donated organ, taking the liver in this case, could treat up to 75 patients, really fundamentally disrupting the calculus of supply and demand on the cell side. And because we use a very innovative endoscopic ultrasound procedure, it is an outpatient procedure under light sedation. Means it's extraordinarily cost effective. The COGS of our therapy are very, very low. I kind of only half joke that we have almost software-like margins on our therapy relative to CRISPR or CAR-T, right? We have an extraordinarily efficient, because we're using a lot of the precedent of liver transplantation. I'll talk more about the importance of regulatory precedent probably throughout the day today. Next slide. For those, in terms of the pipeline, then we have a variety of indications. Our lead indication, as I mentioned, is end-stage liver disease, but we're actually getting ready to announce an orphan pediatric indication we're pursuing in the liver. With the thymus, has a lot of very interesting anti-aging and longevity potential impacts. We've shown the ability to reboot the thymus in an old animal using engrafted cells from a young animal in terms of the Tcell repertoire. So we have some very exciting data in aging coming out. We've also have positive proof of concept data, and by that I don't mean on glass or in vitro. I mean small animal rescuing animals. So we have very positive data in the kidney, able to regenerate an ectopic kidney as well as pancreas. Next slide. So every biotech needs a pipeline slide. So this is ours. Our lead compound, as I mentioned, is for the liver, and we're just starting phase 2 now. Next slide. Just in case you can't envision what this looks like, we can literally grow ectopic organs. And in fact, this is from our Nature Biotechnology paper that Eric pioneered in a variety of different lymph nodes. For end-stage liver disease, we actually focus on periduodenal or mesenteric lymph nodes adjacent to the liver that are enlarged anyway. But the basic biology is shown here that these hepatocytes, when engrafted into the lymph node, engraft, proliferate, form liver lobules. And so all of the epithelial cells and the vasculature for these mini organs are native. So those are functionally autologous because they're recruited from the organism. The only thing that's allogeneic are the hepatocytes themselves. Next slide. This just shows we have lots of, I just wanted to highlight that these are functional tissues. These aren't forming teratomas. These are forming ectopic organs that have the really same biological function. And in fact, we have some great RNA-seq data to that effect as their native counterparts. This is just showing from one of our publications. We have many, a normalization of liver labs as a function of these ectopic organs. Next slide. And this is just a little information on our phase 2A data. We've been very fortunate. We're dealing with the Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies at the FDA. I've dealt with a lot of different review divisions and groups at the FDA. Sometimes those can be extraordinarily frustrating meetings. Really, in this case, it has not been. The Office of Tissues and Advanced Therapies have really gotten it. They understood the science. I think they were very intrigued by it, but they ask a lot of good questions, as the FDA always does. So we've had multiple meetings with them and got our IND approved at the end of last year. So this is our dose ranging study. In many ways, they're approaching us like an anti-cancer therapy. So start low, go slow through this dose escalation schema, but very excited to get this program started. Next slide. And the last point I just want to make was really a conceptual one, because I was thinking about what I see in the longevity field, especially when you have a lot of folks that are doing academic research and recruiting investors that might be new to the life science industry, sort of not always appreciating that, you know, the fact is we're dealing with the US Food and Drug Administration, for better or worse, which means there are just realistic constraints on how quickly things can proceed. COVID's really challenged a lot of those assumptions that I look forward to chatting more about. But I just wanted to put it, and there's been a lot of talk about longevity escape velocity by folks I deeply respect. Aubrey's absolutely wonderful. But I just wanted to have a counterpoint to that, which if you think, so this is the Wright brothers, they were working in their garage, 1897 on the first plane, and next slide. And so they spent the next few years both succeeding and failing at getting a first hang glider to work before, next slide, of course, the famous 1903 first flight. And you think, okay, that's what we're gonna do, you know, in longevity, we're gonna get these anti-aging therapies out. But it's akin to, and next slide, if the Wright brothers were trying their first flight, but had to meet like all of the regulations of the FAA first, right? It's like, so when it comes to drug development, you have all of these requirements, which I think are reasonable. I mean, I say that if you caught me right after an FDA meeting, sometimes I wouldn't, but in general, right, in terms of the gatekeeping function that regulators, whether in the US or elsewhere, play, is actually of critical importance. And why is that? My final slide, please. And that's just been, look, one, it's been really easy to be too early in this field. This is from a Lancet Commission paper on the history of regenerative medicine, right? We've been at this a very long time. Not a lot of things have crossed the finish line yet. And even today, I would say it's very easy, I think, especially on the investing side, to mistake performative science for promising clinical therapies, right? So folks can get cells to do all sorts of Cirque du Soleil sorts of feats on glass, but trying to get those engrafted in an organism to have a therapeutic effect is a much taller burden. And the last thing I'll say is, look, unregulated, some people will inevitably put profits ahead of patient safety. This is just from an article that came out yesterday on an anti-aging gene therapy to dementia patients. This one, I forget where this one was taking place. It was outside the US. There was the other one that I'm sure folks are aware of, right? That were in Colombia. You could pay $1 million to get this gene therapy that would reset your age by 20 years. And so you just have to remember, right? The regulators play a role to try to keep just that sort of, frankly, snake oil sorts of organizations from putting patients at risk. With that, I will turn it back over to Natalia.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's always amazing how, I mean, I remember meeting you a couple of years ago and, being absolutely amazed by this idea. I love the longevity society of these people who are meeting these meetings for their absolutely different way of thinking. And, the idea of placing a kitten in the pigeonhole, in the pigeon nest, like you do in the lymph node. I think it's hard to imagine in any other conference. So exactly. To see a totally different idea on how you approach the disease. Thank you so much also for a wonderful vision and analogy with the aviation history. Maddalena, now to you. Please tell us about yourself and Dorian.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for having me. And I thank also all of you for taking part to this roundtable. Please feel free to also be part of this conversation and talk with us about this topic today. So I'm MadelineAdorno. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Dorian Therapeutics. Our company is basically the same age as Lygenesis. It's almost 3 years old. And me and my co-founder, we both come from Stanford University. It all started from studies that we have been doing there for the past 15 years, basically, where our focus by serendipity, basically, was on Down syndrome. Down syndrome is kind of an interesting case studies because people with Down syndrome, they show a lot of sign of premature aging. They have basically all of them early onset Alzheimer, they have diabetes, metabolic syndrome, osteoporosis, alopecia, etc., etc. So in one clinical situation, you can see a lot of these signs of premature aging. And until now, it was not really clear what's going on with the Down syndrome. And actually, we discovered the epigenetic regulator that is expressed in 3 copies. So it's expressed in the chromosome 21. A epigenetic regulator that is responsible for many of these signs of premature aging. And from there, we started studying actually this new concept that we are moving forward with Dorian Therapeutics. And our company, so it's a preclinical stage company, and our goal is to develop this new class of therapeutics that we call xenoblockers. So the take-home message, the main focus of what we do is that for us, the 2 main things that happens during aging is that from one side, you have a decrease on the activity of stem cells. So the regeneration of a tissue is actually impaired. And that's why several attempts have been to transplant a stem cell and to increase the activity of stem cell in a tissue. And from the other side, in the last few years, there has been a lot of interest in the space of senescence. And senolytics started from there. And we understand that really they have a pathogenic role in the development of disease, the accumulation of senescent cells. But these two events have been treated as two separate things that they don't have anything to do one with the other. Actually, there are several pathways, especially at the epigenetic level, they actually control both processes. So they control stem cell from one side and senescence on the other side. And that's where we focus with our xenoblockers, with these really upstream controllers of both processes. So we have one regulator in particular that we are moving forward, and we are doing preclinical experiment. We have been focusing a lot in osteoarthritis. And it's interesting because we talk about setback. Recently, there was the failure of Unity in osteoarthritis. And this, of course, raised a general concern of how important is senescence and addressing senescence in osteoarthritis. So this was a bit a setback in the field, and have been the elephant in the room for many conversations. So it has been something interesting. And we are also interested in CKD, so we are also developing a program around CKD. At the same time, the way we look at senescence and aging is that from one side, there is the big event, the macrocosmos of treating aging in an organism. Of course, when we think about aging of a person, this mirrors actually the aging of the cells. So we have been also very interested in really focusing only on aging of the cells. And one space where we think this can make a lot of difference is the space of cellular therapy. During cellular therapy, there is a manufacturing phase where cells get cultured for a various amount of time. In these last few years, the space of CAR-T, for example, became very interesting and developed. During CAR-T, the process of manufacturing lasts 15 days. But actually, during these 15 days, the T cells age 30 years. So another interesting approach of using xenoblockers is actually treating aging ex vivo during the manufacturing of cells, for example, for CAR-T, but also for other cell therapy indication. So that has been another very interesting space for us to work with. One of our board members is Aya Jakubowicz, that was the CEO of Kite Pharma, and Adicet after that. So a lot of familiarity with the space. So we have been working on this very actively. So yeah, this is us. I'm also teaching at Stanford the first class on aging and longevity, longing for longevity. So it's a very nice arena where to discuss all of this with other people involved. As Michael was saying, there's a lot of also snake oil discussion in this field. So really moving forward what's real science and what's not, I think it's very important for our field.
Really beautiful. Thank you so much, Maddalena, and thank you also for telling us about your teaching experience, or teaching practice. So you were kind of building the future members of this society and the future attendance of the conferences like this. So that's fantastic. Maybe
it's actually a course in the Stanford Continuing Studies, so it's for people of adult people from all around the world. So
I see.
It's
okay,
been a very interesting conversation.
That's fantastic. Beautiful. So we obviously, I mean, the topic of this discussion is about the consequences of the COVID-19, and obviously the past year being pretty challenging for society and also different to our industry. So my question to Mike, I mean, how does it really affected your company, and what are your thoughts about how did it affect the longevity field as a whole?
Yeah, I guess I would just echo that again. For us, we got lucky. Frankly, there's that phrase that it's better to be lucky than good, and we got lucky on the timing. So we had just finished our large animal work. If I think about what would have happened in the middle of our large animal trial had it struck, I think I'd still be sitting here talking about how we hope to file our IND, right? So I mean, we got very fortunate that way, and because it takes time to file your IND, address all the questions, and get your clinical trial up. For Lygenesis, you really probably couldn't have timed it better insofar as we just finished that study. We had a large bolus of work to get our first patient in. So we were very fortunate, but, working with, clinical trial sites, seeing the impact that they had and how like all of the discretionary procedures and everything else, right, just got ramped down to zero there for a long time. And it's getting better now. But even now, right, your ability to visit the site, your ability to do dry runs, right? It is all constrained since before COVID. I don't know that anything's unusual about the longevity field versus, say, if this was a cardiovascular disease conference or a diabetes conference. I mean, I think a lot of those delays and challenges have probably been more similar than not. If anything, there's probably more longevity assets, I would guess, as a field preclinical than some other fields, right? So maybe if anything, as a field, maybe it's been slightly less impactful, the extent to which you can keep the preclinical work going in the middle of the pandemic, which again, has not been easy, right? Especially when universities are like, a single person can be in the lab at a time. It's like, okay, that makes some things, real challenging.
Maddalena, do you have anything to add here? I mean, you also on preclinical side, how did it affect you?
Like at the beginning of the pandemic was a bit scary, like many things closed down. Luckily, there's an exception for biotech companies, so we were really able to move the program forward. It's true that a lot of collaboration and a lot of projects with external partners were or delayed or canceled. And still the situation continues right now. We have one important partner for our work in India, and right now it's very difficult in India to keep things moving. So that's an important thing to consider. And in general, I think that really the situation with COVID highlighted two things. One is that aging, like he made clear how aging affects many other diseases, like COVID, first of all, like the mortality and of COVID, it's really related to the age. So this really highlighted that treating aging as something that you can do something about, it's something that came up with this situation. And more in general, the trust in biotech and like the fact that scientists actually can help the society move forward and be functional. This really put a lot of faith in this space. And from a money point of view, there has been a lot of injection of capital in biotech in this last year. So it has been a good year in terms of capital available for research and development.
Absolutely. I'm also thinking about the, how the reputation of the companies. I mean, I think the reputation of the field was going up and down. I mean, if we're talking about longevity, and particularly you're working on the Tcell exhaustion, which is a part of the whole story. So I think for Dorian, that's been an interesting, well, let's say, an interesting entrance point.
Absolutely. I mean, exhaustion, in a way, it's a form of replicatives in essence. So, and it's also one of the ways that we have been looking at this. So really the idea that potentially you can use blockers for COVID patients to actually slow down the exhaustion of these cells. So we have been exploring a bit this space. It's extremely interesting, the potential of this. And in general, really, it gave us more information to think about exhaustion in a different way. So not only exhaustion when we think about CAR-T, but really exhaustion as a consequence to a viral infection.
So while we are talking, you're already bringing us into this positive of the COVID. So we know that the last 12 months have been, although challenging, but they also have the ample of unprecedented opportunities for industries. And, you know, infectious diseases and vaccinology have got the incredible boost this year. So we know that there is a fastest way of vaccine development we've seen. I think before it was only mumps in 1960, which took 4 years, and we're here in 8 months from first patient into a trial till emergency use authorization. I'm wondering what, on your point of view, what were the key successes that enabled such fast development, and how can we translate these successes into the longevity field? Maybe I'll start with Mike.
It's a great and fascinating question, and I fear my answer is going to be relatively depressing, which is on the one side, right? I think to your point, I mean, you think of vaccines have been around for what, 200 years now with you know, first cowpox, and someone should really plot time to approval or clinical effect, because you know, it'd be an exponentially decaying curve where it's just, you know, it's something that everyone involved in the life science industry, I think, should rightly be so proud of, like what this industry accomplished. I mean, it is truly remarkable. I know if you go to the Defense Department website, they have a whole thing on sort of the breakdown of the timelines of traditional vaccine development versus what Operation Warp Speed enabled, right? And as someone who spent the past 20 years in drug development, I mean, I don't know any of my colleagues who spent any time in this field, right? It costs too much and it takes too long. And there's this great Nature paper you may have seen. It talks about, like, you know, how Moore's law is the doubling of the number of transistors on a microchip every 18 months. So you get this, see if I can do it right for the screen. Yes, you get this exponentially increasing computational power. Well, they said the converse in drug development is Eroom's law, Moore's law backwards, which is it takes longer and costs exponentially more to develop drugs. And I love the COVID-19 story as an incredibly powerful counterexample that it doesn't have to be that way. But if you look at what it took in terms of at-risk manufacturing, if you look at, you know, the profound capital risk that represents, and you know, Lilly, right? I mean, when you look at portfolio management, net present value, probability of technical success, like if it wasn't for the threat to the world that COVID represented, how would you ever have gotten buy-in for at-risk manufacturing, right? And the federal government's help. And I read a great story a while ago about someone, I think it was a PHRMA rep, talking about how so much of the vaccine development was this incredible efficiency on the front end, incredible efficiency on the back end, but dull normal in the middle, right? You had to run a clinical trial. You had to look at safety and efficacy. It's what we do well, right? And so I do hope the field takes from it that it doesn't have to be this way. What I fear it will take from it is it was such a unique situation, and putting that much capital at risk is something that I don't see becoming the norm, unfortunately.
So obviously capital is a part of the story, but I was thinking more about, you know, about the unprecedented collaboration we had during this time, about the, you know, how fast we could get, could share the results, so I mean, these kind of things. But okay, Maddalena, to you.
Yeah. Like, definitely capital was a requirement to make this happen. And as Michael was saying, also the ability to move through the regulation faster was two of the elements. Another important element has been really the commitment of working together and getting these things done. Like Stanford had a COVID task force just to put together all the resources and say, okay, I have this, you have this, let's put it together and work to make this happen faster. And this has been an important thing. Also, let's think about what happened to the papers related to COVID. They were accessible to everyone very fast. So you wouldn't have to wait, as normally happens, 2 years to know what other people are working on. You know in real time what are the success and non-success of the other people. So this was very important. Another factor is that we need to say that the RNA technology is a technology that also allows to move fast. It's a very versatile. You can easily say, oh, there's a new variant, we can just change the sequence. Something like this, it's hard to imagine something like this with a small molecule. Like the intrinsic ability of the technology is different in how fast you can optimize the process. So there has been also that advantage.
It's very interesting because both of you are not working in the traditional pharma type of modality. So I'm wondering, what is, on your point of view, what is the future therapeutics are going to be? Are they going to be still small molecules and biologics? Or which type of biologics they're going to be?
Yeah, we also develop a small molecule for our target. So we go through the classical target for xenoblockers. But one potential is that the moment you start tackling something that is related to aging and not to a specific disease, you have the advantage that in a different way, but you have a technology that is anyway versatile, because you can think about moving it from one disease to another much faster than restarting the process from scratch of like, let's look for what is specific for Alzheimer, or let's look for what's specific for diabetes. You really go at the root cause. And the moment you develop something like this, you can easily think about a pipeline in a pill and to really move faster across multiple diseases.
Yeah, I would agree with all that. And you know, look, the work we're doing now with the Office of Digital and Advanced Therapies, when you look at what's in their review pipeline in terms of cellular therapies, tissues, incredibly exciting. And if for those of you who haven't seen, Michael Levinson from Tufts has a talk back in 2018 that's been posted online about bioelectric signaling. He's formed a company called Morphoceuticals that's involved in limb regeneration. And it uses alteration of these ion channels that he talks about in his talk to induce changes in basically the bioelectrical program to induce this limb regeneration. It is jaw-dropping science, and it reminds you that we could look back 50 years from now, right, and say, oh, like how quaint. They like thought it was all about the gene and the cell, and in fact, there's whole other mechanisms by which you can get the body to regenerate and heal itself. So, I'm hopeful too that we'll be wrong in some important ways, right? I mean, that's kind of that's the beauty of the scientific endeavor, right? That you look back with enough time scale and you think, man, what were they thinking? And it's important sometimes to project yourself in the future and be open. And I think a lot in the longevity field are just like this, right? You're like, you have to be open to the fact that we might be wrong about a lot of very basic things. And what's exciting about the field of longevity is that there are companies and scientists doing work that I think are very much sort of outside the sort of, it's small molecule, it's ADME work, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And they're taking very different approaches, right? And our hijacking of the lymph node as a bioreactor, I think, is like that. Like, you would not have thought that, I think. I mean, Eric did 10 years ago, but, very few other folks did, right? So it's a very exciting field that way.
Absolutely. We were talking about obviously the huge investment into the COVID situation, and of course the unprecedented warp speed program for 10 billion in something like this such a stimulus has never been seen before for the pharma companies. So obviously, if we compare it with locally spread infections such as Ebola, which took 40 years since the first pathogen isolation, we know that funding did play a lot in this. But I'm wondering, a part of funding, and we discussed that maybe at this point we won't expect such funding for longevity field, even we know that everyone who is working, Maddalena was just telling us, working in kind of increasing people who would be interested in that by teaching, by spreading the word. But I'm wondering, a part of funding, what are the other challenges for the future development for treatment in age-related diseases, on your point of view? Maybe I'll start with Maddalena this time.
Yeah, so one thing that it has been proven challenging is the fact that we need biomarkers to really follow the progression of age-related diseases. And like there has been some work on this with several aging clock, etc. But really, we need more way to see if a longevity treatment has been working or not, and how to implement this also inside a clinical trial for that right now clinical trials are for one specific age-related diseases, but making sure that there are as many longevity markers to be implemented in this clinical trial will be critical. One thing that with COVID, this was kind of easy to track, right? And also in a limited amount of time. The challenge will be always to how do I monitor if something is working without waiting years to see the long-term effect of what I'm doing. So this right now, it's one of the biggest challenges in the space. So we should find a way to think about this and to have metrics, objective metrics that we can measure also early on, or to accept the fact that some clinical trial will last a long time. And this means that we need to start them now. And to start them now, the regulation needs to change to allow the possibility of running this kind of clinical trial.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm wondering, Maddalena, just on this point, do you believe that we can develop something like a surrogate biomarkers for this, similar how we use hypertension for cardiovascular diseases? We don't really, go and measure something in heart tissue, but we rather take hypertension. So do you think that something like this we would need to develop for longevity? I mean,
yeah, exactly. Something easily accessible, something that could be a blood biomarker, or anyway, something that is not also necessarily tissue specific, but or to have a signature in different tissue of what happens after an intervention.
Yeah. So do you think it's more a challenge in regulatory side, or it's more challenge still in the science? I mean, I think there
also
are a number of in the science as well.
Yeah. I think both of them, the needs work in both on both sides, I think.
Michael, you wanted to say?
Oh, that was a better answer than I would give. So I agree with all of that. I guess my counsel is always, if you're waiting for the regulator to lead the way, you sort of have made the wrong choice, right? It's just, they're good at lots of things, but that's not one, right? So, and look, we face that with our thymus program, right? With our ectopic thymus, you're like, if you're waiting for aging to become a viable FDA indication, it's like, make a strategic compromise and pick something else. And that's what we're focused on, right? We're trying to decide, okay, look, if we can reboot an ectopic thymus that will generate a broad T-cell repertoire that has the potential beneficial effects on the organism, you just have to make a strategic bet and a tractable FDA indication. That would just be my 2 cents to anyone doing drug development. The path forward the path of least resistance with the FDA, choose a tractable indication, because even the development of biomarkers, right? You're talking millions of dollars, years of development, and all that work needs to take place. But if you're investing now or you're doing drug development now, I think making those strategic decisions of saying, look, what's the path to least resistance? Choose an indication where there's regulatory precedent, where you might have a unique angle on it. So for us, like, there's precedent of organ transplantation. We're doing cell transplantation for end-stage liver disease, right? It's like, we're not going after aging. We're going after these tractable FDA indications, not because we don't think we have an effect on these other things, but at the end of the day, if you're going to make progress in developing a commercial therapy, you have to make progress with regulators, whether you like it or not. And just to answer the one question in chat, it was Michael Levin, Levin, at Tufts University. New Yorker just did a profile on him like this week. So if you can't find the New Yorker piece, if you do a YouTube search for his 2018 talk, it's become semi-famous, because it is, even if you watch a lot of TED Talks, I mean, it is a jaw-dropping talk on the work he's doing at Tufts.
Yeah, I totally agree with you that we do need to, I think, do need to brand it, or in a way focus on the age-related diseases, and this is the easiest and fastest way in terms of how we move forward, treating the aging itself. I mean, although we know that sarcopenia or the things like these are now becoming the ICD-10 proved indications, but still, aging will take a long time, even we have a very potent speakers like Near and others talking to the government about the aging and, pioneering clinical studies there. I think it will take a long time. I agree with you. but you know, starting with age-related diseases as Lygenesis did will pave the way.
One thing that I think it's important that we do right now is that when we design clinical trial, to incorporate as a secondary endpoint things that are age-related markers, because we need to start understanding what's happening in patient even when we treat a specific disease. I agree with you that also in our case, we are going after, for example, osteoarthritis, not aging in general, but we need to understand what's happening from an aging point of view to move the field forward, even as a secondary endpoint.
Yeah.
Makes sense. So we know that there is, I mean, in 2013, there was this seminal paper or review on the 9 hallmarks of aging. As we know, the key people, I think, who are present in this conference as well, were writing it. So my question to you is, just, you know, for you've been in the field intensively for some time right now, are we, I mean, in 2023, will this review be rewritten? The numbers of hallmarks will increase or will downsize? And what do you think will be the hallmark of aging which would cause the first transformative kind of, will bring the first transformative treatment either to age-related diseases or to aging? Maybe I'll start with Mike.
Okay, sure. One, I would love to see that paper, a revisit of that paper in 2 years, focused. And of course, my bias, right, as a drug developer, my focus of that next paper would be not which is right and which is most promising. I was going to joke that the most promising one is obviously the one that your company is working on, right? That's sort of obviously the most promising. But I would say, you know, when you think of what they identified as the primary hallmarks, right, versus the antagonistic hallmarks versus the, you know, other hallmarks that they had, not whether it's right or wrong, but sort of how tractable and druggable those targets have been, not just in terms of efficacy, but really looking at it from a regulator's mindset of safety, right? Because my fear is that a lot of the primary hallmarks and causes of aging bring with them a host of systemic questions, and it's not that those can't be resolved, right? But those are time intensive, capitally intensive, and have a lot of regulatory risk. And especially if you're running a small company, you have finite shots on goal, so to speak, right? And so again, like you can tell, my focus is on path of least resistance, de-risking assets. And so I think all of those hallmarks, right, there's been so much development over the past decade on all of the science behind them. I would love to see sort of a tractable, which therapies have advanced furthest on what data and show which promise that way. Because if you're investing in this field, I think that's what's key, right? Not necessarily the basic science behind it. If you're investing, it's because you think in a finite amount of time, your investment is gonna multiply hopefully several fold, which again means making progress for better or worse with regulators.
Exactly. Maddalena, to you.
Michael really addressed this very clearly. I think he was right on point. From one side, the best, the most important aspect of aging are, of course, what we are working on. So stem cells, in essence, epigenetic. On the other side, really, safety, it's a big component. And also really what let the science speak. So I also look forward to see what people would say in few years and what's really working. Really, also the other thing is understanding what's upstream of other things. So maybe the hallmark of aging right now is represented as a circle where everything is like at the same time. Maybe it will become more of a pyramid, like with things that comes first and other things that are a consequence of upstream events.
Yes, I think this is an interesting, exactly the kind of find more master switchers upstream, for example, or agree with you. I think at that time, there were also many concepts where validated in terms of things which would aggravate and make aging faster, but not that many, not all hallmarks, I think, really showed the reverse the validation in reverse order, or at least in the higher organisms. So I think that would be a very interesting thing to see and kind of revisit this field and to kind of see how it looks again. So I'm pretty conscious that we are close to the end of our chat. So I'm also wondering whether there are some questions from the audience, so that we are not, the three of us are talking here. So I see. Yeah. Okay, so just feel free to write some additional. So thank you so much for your comments. If you have any questions, do write it in the chat, please. So my next question would be to you on kind of more, let's say maybe self-focused, or how how the big pharma can help this field. Do you think this is the right time for us to engage, and how we can really move it forward from here? Maybe I'll start with Mike.
Sure. Look, I think realistically, I think especially when you look at the number of bets and how large they've become that large pharma is placing, I think the dynamic in investments in life science today is to engage later and be willing to pay more for a de-risked asset versus engage earlier for a higher risk asset. I think that's the pattern of sort of investing. And so, large pharma is a lot like investors that way, right? If you show them small animal data, they want large animal data. If you show them large animal data, they want replicate large animal data. And then when you show them that, they want human data. And so at some point you have to get people to place their bets. And with investors, there's a certain dynamic to do that. I think when you have folks, I think there was a CEO of Pfizer said recently that there basically is no upper limit of what they're willing to pay for a promising asset. But that tells you that they want it de-risked, they want it very advanced. I think that's a real challenge for the longevity field. I mean, you have folks like Sergey Young and Jim Mellon and Greg Bailey at Juvenescence and Longevity Vision Fund, respectively. They've supported our work and they've supported others. There's lots of folks investing. But when you look at the capital required to get an advanced asset with clinical data ready for big pharma partnership, right? That's a real chasm, and it can be a real challenge to cross. You see folks like Unity and others trying to go public, right, to get access to the public capital markets. That's sort of our plan as well, because you need that sort of cash infusion to make yourself appealing enough to big pharma. Because I'm afraid the dynamic today is later de-risked and willing to pay more, but that means someone has to pay to get your asset from where it is today to the point that big pharma will seriously entertain partnering.
Yes, and I think to address this, we do, I think almost every pharmaceutical company does work on the venture. So either have a corporate fund or work with a number of venture funds to kind of breach this gap. I agree with you, Michael, and I'm a part of the venture science team at Lilly. And that's exactly what the goal is, to provide some help or to incubate those companies or to develop them further with the help of venture funds till the time we could really transact. So, and also, and during this time we would still need to really see and provide with our advice and really advice on the type of package we would need to see in order to transact later. Yeah, so very, very helpful. Maddalena, you?
So from my point of view, right now, it's clear that pharma seems very interested in tackling aging mechanism to treat specific diseases. And so there's a lot of interest in, taking this company or certain assets that come from the longevity ranging space and develop in a pharma program for treatment of specific disease. And this is fantastic because it takes a certain amount of capital to really go through the entire cycle of clinical trial. One thing that I think it's very important is that, again, we are not ready yet for doing longevity and aging trials, but the field will move there in 10 years from now. At some point, we are going to get there. So I think it's very important that pharma really put these also, implement these also in the clinical trial and the way they are looking at how to design a clinical trial for a specific age-related diseases. So again, I think having an awareness of what's important to do now for being at the forefront of this field 10 years from now, it's very important. So again, without, of course, losing assets for targeting something that is still not accepted from a regulatory point of view, but implementing secondary endpoint related to aging and also tracking comorbidity when you treat a single disease, but be aware of what happens to the other tissue the moment that you are treating a specific disease. I think it's very important.
Yes. But you know, yeah, so it's always, as we say, this is, I think, it would be a very, and I hope that maybe, you know, COVID also, you know, brought this, you know, this view on the aging and the focus on the age-related, you know, on the aging population, really into that. But of course, there is a limited things we can track. I mean, it's not only financial, it's timing, all these different types of reasons. And I think once the field is more certain in terms of the biomarker we have to put into the trial, exactly as we discussed before, the more, you know, the higher probability is that this would be a part of the trial design. Yeah, great. So I cannot see any additional questions. So I suggest that any final remarks we would like to do. It was obviously my great pleasure to have both Michael and Maddalena today. Was really really exciting to discuss and hear from you firsthand about your experiences with COVID, about your perspective for the field, and also on the thoughts how we can work together. So this has been very useful and helpful. I would like to thank both of our speakers, and would like to give you them opportunities to give their final remarks. Maybe I'll start with Mike.
Oh, just thanks so much for having me. You know, it was a very enjoyable discussion, and the prompts to think about COVID and the ways in which it's presented unique opportunities, I think was very valuable. So thanks for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. That has been a great discussion, and I hope to hear from the audience as well, here or separately.
Thank you so much.
And of course, thank you to you, Natalia, for a wonderful effort and preparation and for moderating our discussion today.
Thank you so much, Angela. All the best for everyone, and a lovely evening or day for those who are joining us from the US.